Hi, welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to look at the graph of a purely competitive firm, of a firm operating in a purely competitive environment. And on a previous podcast, we actually calculated the numbers for a firm, all the cost numbers and all these revenue numbers. We calculated all of those, and then we drew the curves for them, and we got these curves that they look like the normal curves that we were used to from some earlier podcasts about the cost curves. The average total cost curve slopes down, hits a minimum, and rises. The average variable cost does the same thing. The marginal cost intersects them both at their lowest points. That was here and here, and then we added this average revenue equals marginal revenue equals price equals demand. We added this perfectly elastic demand curve. And so now what we want to do, we did this in a very concrete way with actual numbers. Now what we want to do is we want to do this in an abstract way. We want to do this in a very abstract way. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to put, on this graph, I'm going to put quantity on the horizontal, and I'm going to put dollars on the vertical, but I don't have any numbers anymore. I just know what my curves are going to look like. So I know we're going to have a marginal cost curve that slopes down, hits a minimum, and then rises. And by the way, you should get used to drawing this. You as the viewer should get used to drawing these. As a microeconomics student, you've got to be able to draw these graphs, and you got to be able to draw them by hand. Okay, you got to be able to draw these. So here's the marginal cost curve, and then we know the average total cost curve. We know that that's going to slope down, hit a minimum where it intersects marginal cost, and then rise. So we know the average total cost curve is going to come down, hit a minimum where it intersects marginal cost, and then rise. That's my average total cost curve. And then the average variable cost curve, that's going to do the same thing, slope down, hit a minimum, rise, and get closer and closer to average total cost as it does. And we did that before on a previous video. Now, the thing that we're going to add to this is going to be the demand curve. And we know the demand curve is going to be perfectly elastic. So here comes my demand curve, and I'll try to draw this straight. So there's my demand curve. And keep in mind that demand curve is a lot of things. That's the demand curve, it's the marginal revenue curve, it's the average revenue curve, and it's the price all at the same time. And so now we're going to answer. We're going to ask the question like we did on the last graph, like we did back here. We asked the question, where is the point of profit maximization? And we said that happens at marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We did that with the numbers. And by the way, if we go back and we look at the numbers where marginal revenue is 50 all the way down. So the marginal cost, that equals 50 right here. And so marginal revenue equals marginal cost when we produce at 6 units of production. And look at that. That's also where we maximize our profits, which was the goal of the whole thing. So we said we're going to produce where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Again, we did that with numbers. Now we do it in an abstract way, but it's still true. This is the marginal revenue curve. This is the marginal cost curve, and we're going to produce we're going to maximize profits by producing where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. And so there it is. We're going to produce here at what we're going to just call Q1. There's some number associated with that. I don't know what it is, and I don't care at the moment. We're going to produce Q1 units, which is where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Now, let's find some other things. Well, we can come up here to the average revenue curve, which is also the marginal revenue curve, and we can come across and we can say that this is average revenue. I'll call it average revenue 1 when we produce Q1 units. And then what about the average total cost? Well, we can come up to where we hit the average total cost and come across. Let me just change my color up here. So we can come up here to where we hit the average total cost, where we have our tunnel vision. Okay, right here, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's our tunnel vision. That's where everything's going to happen. So at that level of production, we come up and hit the average total cost curve and come across. And that's going to give me my average total cost. We'll call it average total cost 1. Now, what about total revenue and total cost? Well, Remember, we said before, we said that total revenue is equal to average revenue multiplied by quantity. We did that on the previous video with numbers. Now we're going to do it without numbers, but it doesn't matter. It's just going to be Q1. That's going to be right here. Q1. That's going to be the base multiplied by the height of the rectangle when we go up to the average revenue curve, and then we come across here and we finish that off. We finish off the rectangle, and we say that big rectangle, when we do quantity multiplied by average revenue, that's going to give you the total revenue. So this big red box is going to be equal to the total revenue. Now, where do we find the total cost? Well, the total cost, same thing. Remember, total cost is equal to average total cost, multiplied by quantity. Average total cost multiplied by quantity. So that's going to be quantity down here. Quantity down here, that's going to be the base of the rectangle, multiplied by the height of the rectangle, which is going to be up to average total cost. Come over and complete that rectangle. Okay, come over and complete that. And that's going to give you the total cost. Okay, that's going to be here. That's going to be this big blue box. That's going to be the total cost. And then we take the total cost, which is this big guy, the big red one, and minus the sorry, did I just say that wrong? The total revenue is the big red box, minus the total cost, which is the blue box, and what's going to be left over? That's going to be our economic profit. That's going to be our economic profit right there in the middle. And so you see, I can find all of this stuff. I can find all of this in a very abstract way without needing any numbers, okay? And we prefer to do things in the abstract without numbers, because if we can do things with variables, then that must mean that they are always true. When we prove something with variables, must mean that it's always true in the general case, okay? So here's the concrete example. Here's the concrete example, but more important, here's the abstract example. Got to be able to draw that graph. You got to be able to find that total revenue box. You got to be able to find the total cost box, and you got to be able to find that economic profit box. And that's going to be a big deal, and we're going to do a lot more with these graphs on some future videos. All right, this has been Mr. Hagan with another Econ Podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.